Hello, and welcome to the Totally Clinical podcast, brought to you by Teckro. Totally Clinical is a deep dive into the freshest trends, big-time challenges, and most excellent triumphs of clinical trials. I'm Hannah, your host. Join me as I chat with industry experts, trailblazers, thought leaders, and most importantly, the people benefiting from clinical research. So tune in, settle back, and don't touch that dial. It's time to get totally clinical. This week, I've something a little bit different on the agenda. Trees. Trees are vital for the environment and reforestation key to help combat climate change. But there is a clinical angle at the crucial intersection where clinical research affects the environment. Joining me to discuss this and to expand more on the importance of planting for the planet is Karl McGrory, Director Europe at One Tree Planted, an international non-profit organisation focused on global reforestation. Now, there are many advantages to reforestation. It helps to rebuild forests after fires and floods, offering jobs for social impact and restores biodiversity. Here at Teckro, we are really proud to be supporters of One Tree Planted, contributing by planting thousands of trees in our company headquarters backyard, Ireland. Thank you for joining me today, Karl. Now, in that introduction, I've given some background about why reforestation needs to be prioritised to protect the environment. But let's start by going a bit more in depth about why reforestation is central to restoring the balance of nature.
Lovely to join you today and talk a bit more about our partnership and the work of One Tree Planted. So, in terms of balancing nature, the work that we do planting trees around the world is just crucial. Everyone appreciates the beauty of a tree, the change of the colours and the leaves in the autumn, sitting under its shade on a picnic on a nice summer's day. And that's probably a good place to start, in that trees are just vital for the clean, cool air that we breathe. So not only producing the oxygen, but cleaning the particulates from pollution. And in terms of cool air, again, we're seeing, like last summer across Europe, one of the biggest heat waves we ever experienced, and trees are just vital for cooling the air around us. It's amazing, actually, if you're walking through a city and you walk under a nice big established tree, you can feel the coolness that it provides for you. And actually, we did a project where we monitored the air in a temporary urban forest that we set up last year. And we collected the data and proved that, because there's not a lot of scientific data around it. So it was good to have just a little pop-up forest and evidence that with some air monitoring equipment. Water is vital to all of life on the planet. Of course, we're made up of 2/3 of water, and flood management with trees is another huge area that's becoming increasingly important. Again, in the summer, when we have downpours, sometimes we've seen huge issues with flash floods, and particularly in Germany, where we've had devastating landslides and things like that. And I know that planting trees along what we call riparian corridors, which is along riversides and sometimes higher up in the hills, so that they can divert water deep into the soil before it runs off down the hills into the towns and cities and creates potential issues for our lives. Another aspect is that 80% of the planet's plant and animal species depend on trees. I always love to refer to one of our favourites in the UK, the beautiful oak tree, that it's capable of hosting 600 different species. That's right, you heard right, 600 different species on one tree. And that just shows the power of trees to sustain life on the planet. 1.6 billion people rely on trees directly for their livelihoods, whether that's from the products from timber or from fruit and nuts and things like that to sustain their livelihoods. And then lastly, just being the lungs of the earth and also the nursery of the seas. if you go onto our YouTube channel, have a quick look at some of the videos, you'll be able to find some really cool information on mangroves and mangrove trees with their umbrella of roots that stand in the water on the rivers on the edge of seas. Are the nursery trees where fish come to spawn and their young shelter before they make their ways back into the rivers, back into the seas. So that's just a few points on how vital trees are for the planet, the people, and the nature that we're living with.
Wow, 600 species in one tree. I bet many people don't know that. So, if we can move on to One Tree Planted's mission and goals, could you explain more about these?
So, One Tree Planted are a global reforestation charity. We were founded in 2014, and every year we've been doubling in size and just amazing growth. And really, our mission is to make it as easy as possible for people to help plant trees. Whether that's a business or an individual, we just try and make it as simple as possible. We're working to restore forests to create biodiversity and have a positive social impact around the world.
Now, let's discuss the results you've seen so far at One Tree Planted. How many trees have you planted and in which countries?
So, One Tree Planted have doubled in size every year, and we are now working in over 80 countries. We have nearly 700 partner organizations across the world that we're planting trees with, and we have planted grand total of over 92 million trees. And since I've joined One Tree Planted, the growth has been phenomenal and just amazing to behold and see all of the different projects that we're working on around the world. It's really inspiring, and the different partners we work with. To give you a little flavor of the mix, in 2023 at the moment, and this it changes all of the time, so it's just a snapshot, but we are planting over 6 million trees in South Africa, over 11 million trees in South America, 5 million in Brazil alone. And we really do touch the entire globe with our work.
You've had some really great results there, and it just goes to show how keen governments, businesses, and individuals are to meet sustainability goals. Now, if we move to the situation in Ireland, one of the reasons Teckro was really keen to help was because the country suffered significant deforestation over the centuries, and we really want to do our bit to put this right. Could you explain more about Ireland's situation and how Teckro is going to help here?
Yeah, it's amazing to speak with you as an Irish company. Ireland is dear to my heart because my wife's from Ireland. I've spent a lot of time there in the past and have some distant relatives myself. It is the country in Europe, actually, I think it's joint in Europe with the lowest number of percentage of tree cover in the country, which is due to the fact that humans have used the land in a different way, become farmers. We've then developed intensive agriculture. We've enhanced our towns and cities and developed urban sprawl. So the land use has really changed completely, and over the years, and been used for all sorts of different things, from exploration to industrialization. But in Ireland in particular, it's probably starker than anywhere else. There's a island is known as the land of the Celts, and that is the people of the forest. And now it has, I think, less than 3% forest cover. And there's a old folklore that said a squirrel could travel from the south of Ireland to the northern tip of Ireland without touching the ground. That's how forested it was. So it really is important that we restore some of the trees to the landscape. And actually, of particular interest in your industry as well is that there's a high proportion of respiratory diseases in Ireland, which I don't think the link has been made definitively by anyone, but for me, in my gut, it just shows less trees and more respiratory diseases. In terms of the work we're doing in Ireland at the moment, we're planting around 200,000 trees a year, and Teckro are obviously contributing towards that valuable reforestation effort. The fantastic thing about the project as well is it covers both the north and south of Ireland, and really, again, touches on all the different areas across the community. There's a lot of community planting, a lot of agricultural planting and community orchards and things like that, planting around schools, which is just one of the most important things we can possibly do with planting trees.
I love the anecdote about the squirrel's tail not touching the ground. Let's hope one day this will again be the case. So, when the average person thinks about sustainability, the pharmaceutical industry, to be honest, may not immediately spring to mind. But there has been a real shift in the industry towards net zero goals, such as from AstraZeneca, which aims to have zero carbon emissions from global operations by 2025. In fact, AstraZeneca has been working with One Tree Planted. Could you explain more about this?
Yes, so we started working with AstraZeneca in 2020 when they announced at the World Economic Forum that they were going to develop the AZ Forest, as they call it, in partnership with One Tree Planted. So we're delighted to be a global reforestation partner for AstraZeneca with the goal of planting 50 million trees worldwide by 2025. And this project, it focuses on two really large projects, one in Australia, where we're planting 25 million trees in an effort to restore land that's been devastated by bushfires, and 20 million trees in Indonesia for wildlife and people. In Indonesia, there's one of the largest, I think actually the largest remaining colony of orangutans, so really, really crucial for the wildlife, and in particular the orangutans there. And in Australia, we are just working on this huge project where it will cover approximately 20,000 hectares of land and create habitat for dozens of endangered species, and sequester carbon, provide all of the benefits for people in terms of cooling and the urban heat island effect, and reducing emissions that could be produced by approximately 1 million cars. Absolutely amazing to be involved in that project. We work with a number of pharmaceutical industry companies like Teckro and AstraZeneca, and it has such a big impact on our lives every day. And the fact that the majority of medicines that we've developed in the past have come from the basis of plants, to have that synergy with now reforesting parts of the planet and helping to reduce the impact of the industry is just a fantastic thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, the paper based aspect of clinical trials evidently affects the environment. Here at Teckro, we support an approach to remote monitoring for trials, so there's less impact on nature. So, this is where we saw the parallel of One Tree Planted. Have you had any other industry feedback on why One Tree Planted appealed as a project?
Well, I think there's an interesting synergy there as well because One Tree Planted, we try to engage with the latest technology to help monitor the planting that we are engaged with across the world. So we are developing our approach to satellite-based monitoring, trying to really enhance what we do there and bring our industry forward, and also things like drones, use for everything from monitoring forests to potentially looking at seed collection or even planting seeds. And all of those sorts of things are things that One Tree Planted have been engaged with, working with partners on, trying to make the most of the technology we have out there. I've worked in a number of different sustainability and charities and nature-based organizations, and I've never seen anywhere near the efficient use of technology and responsiveness that One Tree Planted has. And I think Teckro has that ethos as well of being responsive, using the best technology. And I think there's such a synergy there with us, with One Tree Planted.
Now, let's talk about the work you are currently overseeing in Europe. and what you're focused on right now?
So in Europe, we have a number of strategic priorities that are really based around the key issues that we have relating to trees, the environment, and we have been trying to bring on a few more projects with regards to agroforestry. And for those listening that aren't aware of what agroforestry is, it's the practice of planting trees between crops to help with soil stability, to help increase the yield of the farmers so that they have I don't know if you call it a 3D farm, so to speak, but rather than just having monocrops on the ground and one level of cropping, that you then have the produce, whether it's nuts, seeds, fruit, trees, at a different level in different time of year as well. So enhancing that, and also adding to the leaf matter that goes back into the soil can increase the nutrients and the quality of the soil that the farmer's working with. So that's really key. Look at changing the way that we produce our food and care for the soil and the planet at the same time, adding biodiversity into the farm. Another thing is projects that contribute towards climate mitigation and resilience to pests and disease. In across Europe, we have ash dieback, which is devastating ash trees across the UK, and there is no cure for it. It's an airborne fungus, and ash trees are particularly important for things like hedgerows and wildlife corridors. They're the most numerous tree outside of woodlands, and the disease means that we're going to lose possibly 90% of them in the long term. So using our efforts now to replace those trees or supplement those trees, increase the resilience by planting a variety of species along these corridors, or creating new forests that have more diversity in them, is such an important thing to do. In England, we have a project in community forests that's doing just that, working across the whole of the country, and we'll be planting hopefully up to 1.5 million trees a year there.
You mentioned wildlife corridors earlier. Could you explain more about these and their purpose?
Yeah, wildlife corridors, I was just touching on them with the disease because they're interlinked, but also in terms of hedgerows and riparian planting that I mentioned earlier. Again, we're supporting projects with that emphasis because it's just so important for nature, but also important for preventing flash flooding. Even in Scotland, for example, there's a huge issue where the river and salmon organizations, NGOs, are highlighting the fact that the increase in temperature in rivers from climate change is at risk of destroying the salmon stocks. And then the knock on effect is that destroys potentially the whole community in terms of tourism for fishing and ecotourism and all sorts of things, just enjoying the nature and the environment in Scotland. That there's a huge push for riparian planting to help reduce or reverse that heating effect in rivers and sustain the economy and the traditions up in Scotland. And then finally, touch on probably where we've got one of our other biggest projects in Europe is focused on forest fire recovery. So in Portugal, for example, since 2017, we've seen the biggest forest fires on record. In the project that we're working on in Portugal, there was 12,000 hectares burnt in just 3 or 4 days. And it's just vital that we help to build resilience into those communities, help restore them, help them recover from such devastating effects, and plan the forests in a way that they're going to be more resilient to fire. So in that instance, you might be reducing the number of eucalyptus and pine trees and enhancing them with a broader diversity of species. Some trees actually respond well to fire and their seeds are resilient to fire, so they spring back afterwards. The strawberry tree in Portugal, and actually it's native to Ireland as well, the strawberry tree, it's a beautiful tree that's resilient to fire. So it can be burnt and it will spring back and grow again.
Great. Thank you for coming on to speak with me today, Karl. It's been so fascinating to learn about the important work One Tree Planted is doing. Now, before we wrap up, I want to ask what's next for One Tree Planted. You've had massive success working with businesses and individuals all over the world. You've just talked about some of the work you do in Europe. What big goals does the company have on the horizon?
We always focus on the numbers when we're reporting and things like that, but what our big goal is to make sure that we have high quality projects that we're monitoring with the latest technology, that we have high quality evidence that the trees have survived, that the trees are growing well, that we're able to report on their benefits in terms of social, community, environmental, biodiversity impacts. And that is the real focus for us now. We have had amazing success in growing as fast as we've grown. We'll always be looking to increase that number and enhance reforestation around the globe. But really, we want to make sure that those trees are there and cared for in the long term, and bringing all of the benefits that we need to have the environmental impact, the social impact, the community impact that we want these trees to have when we're all contributing to planting them right now, that they benefit generations to come.
And that's your dose of Totally Clinical. For all the listeners out there, you can follow Teckro on LinkedIn and Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, download the Totally Clinical podcast on Apple, Spotify, and Google. See you on your next visit, and remember to bring your friends. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.